Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Irish Illustrated ISO. Haven't had one in a while. We thought it was time to get one in here before 4th of July. And the timing is right because those of you that are subscribers to Irish Illustrated, you know we're doing our 15th annual First Rate series, our summer series, going through all the positions of including Notre Dame and the 12 opponents and ranking them. I know that our scoring system has come under a little bit of scrutiny. It was never intended to be a mathematical determination of exactly who is the best team. Maybe in the future we'll try to use some technology to upgrade that area. But it was mainly started 15 years ago to give everybody an idea what the talent was on Notre Dame by position, and then their 12 opponents by position. We put them in order. It's certainly not an exact science. I never intended it to be, but here we are we're at the halfway point of the offense and defense. It's 10 different categories. I include schedules and coaching at the end. But the first eight first rates are four on offense and four on defense. And we've reached the halfway point, or we finished the offense the other day with the offensive line. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Notre Dame is rated very high, not surprising to a lot of people, not high enough in some opinions based upon our quarterback rating, but our quarterback rating was lower than it probably, much lower than it probably will be next year at this time, provided CJ Carr, as we anticipate, being the starting quarterback. But he's a first-time starter. If he is the starter over Kenny Minchey, and it takes a while for young quarterbacks to learn what defenses are doing against them, to see some of these things live before they can adapt to it. So Notre Dame ranks very high. Not I had Notre Dame eighth at quarterback because there are some other quarterbacks on the schedule, namely Carson Beck, who transferred from Georgia to Miami. He's thrown for nearly 8,000 yards, completed 72% of his passes 2 years ago, had a bad year last year. And then, of course, the injury. I know there's been a lot of talk about his injury. Will he be okay? Every person I've talked to that would have any knowledge of Carson Beck's health, that I can get to anyway, believes that he will be fine. And that was that was the way we understood the elbow injury all along, that he would recover pretty quickly. I think Miami was very careful about how much they or before they turned him loose to throw the football. But anyway, we had Georgia number one, Boise State, Maddox Madsen, who would not, if this was an NFL draft preview, we would not have him second because he's undersized and probably won't make it in the NFL. But on the college level, he threw for 3,000 yards last year. Very efficient with the football, 23 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Of course, he had Ashton Jeanty to run the football, but he was really good. We have Pittsburgh's Eli Holston, number three. Jaden Maiava from USC, who did an excellent job against Notre Dame until he met Christian Gray and Xavier Watts in the fourth quarter and turned that into a bad game for him. But those are our top four. I really like, I'm going to try to maybe give a sleeper pick for each position. My sleeper pick is Arkansas's Talon Green, who I think is a really dynamic quarterback. Threw for almost 3,200 yards last year, only 15 touchdown passes, but he ran for 602 yards, and he led the number 10 offense in the country at Arkansas. So I think he's a sleeper. Then we have Texas A&M with Marcel Reed and Jacob Zeno, who's a transfer from UAB. And then we have to have Navy's Blake Horvath because he's so productive. 1,200 yards rushing, 1,300 yards passing, a total of 30 touchdowns. Then we came to CJ Carr. And I've promised we'll do a ranking at the end of the season to see exactly how well CJ Carr did against the other quarterbacks on Notre Dame's schedule. But there has to be some growing pains there a little bit. There doesn't have to be, but usually there is. And so I was very conservative in that ranking. When we get to the running backs, really when we get to running backs, receivers / tight ends and offensive line, I wasn't conservative. In fact, I think a few people were surprised at the ranking with Notre Dame on the first rate series at receiver and tight end. But running backs, there really isn't a whole lot of doubt. Jeremiah Love, the trio of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams is the best on the schedule. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There's some other running backs here that I really like. Le'Veon Moss, who missed the last 4 games of last season for Texas A&M, is a pretty dynamic back, 6.3 yards per carry, along the lines of what Jeremiah Love was capable of doing last year. 765 yards. He probably would have gone beyond 1,000 yards had he not suffered that injury. But he had 20 carries for 70 yards against Notre Dame last year. Actually, A&M was 7-1 when Moss played last year, and that one loss, of course, was to Notre Dame. Really like the big back at Miami, Mark Fletcher, 6'2", 225 pounds. And this is in light of the fact that Miami lost a 1,000-yard rusher from last season, Damian Martinez, who was a seventh-round draft pick. But Mark Fletcher, look for him in that first game because he's a load, 6'2", 225 pounds. I also really like Desmond Reed, the running back for Pittsburgh. He ran for 962 yards, a 5.3-yard average. Their offensive line got really banged up last year and really struggled in November. Some people might say, well, Notre Dame's offensive line was banged up, and they didn't struggle. Well, that's a good point. Notre Dame's depth on the offensive line is a lot better than Pittsburgh's was. And then I do want to mention USC's running back situation because it's kind of interesting. They lost Woody Marks to the NFL, and Quentin Joyner was bought by Texas Tech during the offseason. So they've had to transition. They're going with Eli Sanders, who was originally at Iowa State, came from New Mexico after this last year, rushed for 1,000 yards last year, another 700 at Iowa State. And then they also have a junior college transfer, Wayman Jordan Jr., who rushed for over 1,600 yards and 7.4 yards per carry last year for a junior college in Kansas. So put that in perspective. But I'll be interested to see what those two running backs do, excuse me, leading up to Notre Dame USC. Arkansas has another big back, a 240-pounder Braylon Russell. NC State has Hollywood Smothers. Love that name. And a little shout out to Devin Mockabee from Purdue. He's rushed for almost 2,500 yards in college, but he plays for Purdue. And give that I gave him he's a 5-star player in terms of loyalty to Purdue because he could have gone just about anywhere to play his last year of college football, and he stayed with Purdue. So kudos to him, and congratulations to Purdue maintaining Mockabee. That's about the extent of their prowess on the offensive side of the ball. So to me, Notre Dame's a clear number one. So after two categories, Notre Dame, and you're going to find at the end of these four categories, it's Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Miami. It's Texas A&M, Notre Dame, Miami. It's Miami. It's some combination of those three at the top. Then you get to USC, not too far behind. I'll get into this a little bit later as we get into wrapping up the offense. Now we move on to the wide receivers and tight ends. In the first group that I want to mention, well, I want to mention Miami first, just because of the magnitude of what they lost at receiver. I think they've done a pretty good job of replenishing, but it would take a virtual miracle to replenish what they lost. Check this out. They had 5 wideouts. Maybe it included a tight end, but 5 pass catchers. It doesn't include a running back, who had a career combined 595 receptions for 8,219 yards and 61 touchdowns. Those players were on Miami's team last year. None of them are this year, including Xavier Restrepo. If you ever saw Miami play with that wideout, he caught 200 passes for just short of 3,000 yards and 21 touchdowns. He was a monster. He was very difficult to stop on the collegiate level. I don't know how well that'll translate to the NFL, but that's Miami. I mean, had a cross section of those guys return, I probably would have put them number one. But I put Notre Dame number one, and that surprised some people. And the reason I put Notre Dame number one is because I do not see a better top 4 wide receivers or top 5 pass catchers, including the tight end, than Malachi Fields transferring from Virginia, Jaden Greathouse, who of course finished very strong last year against the top competition that Notre Dame faced, Will Pauling, the transfer from Wisconsin, a volume receiver, a guy that I think Notre Dame fans will grow to love because he's always available for the short pass and an additional 9 or 11 yards. And then, of course, Jordan Faison, who, you know, I've talked about him not being strong enough, and he needs to get stronger, and that, of course, is true. But you have to take in consideration that he had a nasty ankle injury in week 1 against Texas A&M, and then shortly thereafter re-injured the ankle. So it was difficult for him to be up to speed and to be as strong as he was capable of being were he fully healthy. But he was not, and I expect a jump back from him. Number 2 on our list is USC, and I was the biggest fan of Makai Lemon going into last year's game, the whiteout for the Trojans. and he did not disappoint. Well, he may have disappointed some Notre Dame fans because he had a big game against Notre Dame. And then Jacoby Lane, a big receiver who's caught three touchdown passes against Notre Dame. So those two guys, and they're both back, caught 16 passes for 196 yards and three touchdowns against Notre Dame. That's a dynamic duo. But the depth of their receiving core, I don't see it because they've lost a lot as well. They did bring in Prince Strachan from Boise State, who had 25 catches last year. Those top two are really good, but they don't have the depth at that position, at those positions that Notre Dame does. And so that's why they're second. Texas A&M took away from one of Notre Dame's upcoming 2025 opponents, NC State, and gave to Texas A&M, Notre Dame's game two, and that's Kevin Casey Concepcion, who has 1,300 yards and 16 touchdowns in his first 2 years in college at NC State. He's a load, but they lost 145 receptions and 1,900 yards and 14 touchdowns from five receivers. So they have a lot to replace. They're not as deep as Notre Dame, but they did get a transfer from Mississippi State, Mario Craver, who only caught, I think, 17 passes, but he averaged 21.6 yards per catch and had three touchdowns. So I would expect an uptick from his productivity now that he's with Texas A&M. And then I know Texas A&M is very high on Terry Bussey, who is a running back in the Aggies program, and now they've moved him full time to receiver. So I think those top three are really dangerous, but again, not the depth that I think Notre Dame throws out there. Syracuse lost a lot as well. I still like their receiving core. I rated them higher than what I saw some of the preseason magazines rate them. They lost Trevor Pena. He transferred to Penn State, but he caught 89 passes, 941 yards, 11 touchdowns last year. He was prolific. They had a quarterback that led the nation in passing yards, Kyle McCord. He, of course, is gone. So Pena's gone to Penn State. And then Aronde Gadsden, that tight end, it seems like he was there for 8 years. In his career, he caught 143 passes, 2,000 yards, and 14 touchdowns. But he's gone and off to the NFL. And then I think a sneaky performer for them last year, Jackson Meeks, who caught 78 passes with over 1,000 yards and seven touchdowns. He was a free agent with the Detroit Lions. So they lost a lot. But I do like two of their receivers. Justice Ross Simmons, who was at Colorado State, he had a hamstring problem at Syracuse last year. And then Daryl Gill, who was Kyle McCord's fourth option last year. But they threw the football to the volume was so great to Pena, Gadsden, and Meeks that there wasn't a whole lot left over for Gill, but he will move to the forefront. And then I mentioned, what Miami lost at receiver. I'm not going to get into who they have as replacements right now, but it's a significant step back. But they do have Carson Beck throwing on the football. And again, I'm of the mindset that Beck's going to have a bounce back season this year. I know a lot of fans don't want to hear that because I know he struggled last year, but the reality is, every year I start this series, I get criticized, but because I am supposedly leaning too heavily upon stats from last year. Well, I mean, you're not being realistic if you don't think that that matters most. Every coach will tell you they want players that are experienced, that have seen it, that have been through it. And so, yeah, I rely heavily upon stats from previous years, but you also try to project. I projected C.J. Carr against several other quarterbacks that Notre Dame will face that have vastly more experience than he does. But I slotted him number 8, and I think if I'd had him 5 or 6, everybody would have been fine with that. But it is what it is. Now we move on to the offensive line, and everybody loves Notre Dame's offensive line. You love Notre Dame's offensive line. Joe Rudolph does. Notre Dame does in general. Marcus Freeman. It's an excellent line. I do have them number 1, but it was really, really close with Texas A&M because Texas A&M has probably the best guard in the country, and Armaj Reed Adams. But Notre Dame has the best guard tandem, I believe, in Charles Jagusa and Billy Schrauth. Now, A&M fans would hear that and say, well, wait a minute, what about Chase Basantis, the other Texas A&M guard? And he's really good too. These two teams, I mean, I really can't imagine any other teams that could crack the top 2 at offensive guard with Notre Dame and A&M, or A&M and Notre Dame. Now, some people would put A&M first because they have 153 career starts as an offensive line. Notre Dame only has 54. But I mean, part of what makes assessing these kind of things difficult is I know Notre Dame better than anyone. And okay, so Notre Dame only has 54 combined starts, but you know that Charles Jagusah with 2 career starts, he might as well have 20 because he's that good. So, those numbers can be a little bit deceiving, but these two lines are really, really good. You know what Notre Dame has at guard. Emil Wagner really rounded into great shape last year for Notre Dame at right tackle. Anthony Knapp, everybody's always trying to replace Anthony Knapp with Gerby Lambert. I would imagine that's possible. That could happen, but Anthony Knapp was for a true freshman last year. What he did against Nick Scorton in the opening game against Texas A&M was amazing. He was outstanding in that game. There were moments through the season where he struggled a little bit because opponents are looking at what the true freshman offensive tackles' tendencies are from week to week, and you pick up on things and you take advantage of them. You throw some change ups to him, maybe some different moves by a defensive end that he didn't use in previous weeks as Anthony Knapp is studying his opponent. But he's a starter, and I would venture a guess that it's going to be very difficult to expect Joe Rudolph to remove Anthony Knapp as a starter at any point moving forward. And Knapp could end up on the interior. We don't know what Ashton Craig is going to do after this year. We don't know what Emil Wagner is going to do after this year. But it'll be interesting. But A&M's got a really good line. They also have Trey Zune at tackle. And interestingly enough, their center, Mark Nabout Jr., he was injured. I believe he was injured in the Notre Dame game last year and was out for the season. And then Notre Dame lost their center, Ashton Craig, 3 games into the season. So both have centers coming back from injuries. Really interesting comparison. Both very, very good. I have Miami number 3. Francis Mauigoa is their right tackle. What I'm hearing, and I've seen a little bit of his film, the maybe probably the best combination pass blocker, run blocker at offensive tackle in the country this year. Not a ton of experience there, although they brought in James Brockermeyer, the starting center at TCU, the Brockermeyer name, known for offensive line player, at least highly rated offensive lineman coming out of high school. And a sleeper here, and this is why I warn everybody, don't just assume that because Ashton Jeanty is gone, that Boise State's going to collapse. They're not going to. They're very experienced at quarterback, and they're very experienced on the offensive line. I have them number 4 among Notre Dame and its 12 opponents. And then number 5, I have USC. They lost some really key people. Jonah Monheim has been there forever. John Bryce always reminds us that he was recruited by Notre Dame in high school. Monheim was the leader of that offensive line really for I'd say 3 years. And then they lost Emmanuel Pregnon to Oregon, which is a huge blow, but they've compensated by bringing in John Ray Reed from Syracuse and then DJ Wingfield from Purdue. Maccabee may be faithful to Purdue, but a lot of other guys weren't, and they went elsewhere, and that's understandable. We understand why that's the case. But I want to bring up a point about offensive line. Pete Sampson mentioned in a podcast, and we talked about it with Tim O'Malley, but the continuity up front on an offensive line. Remember Notre Dame brought in Cade Madden a few years ago, but they haven't had any need to bring in a transfer offensive lineman. And it's great for a USC to be able to bring in transfers from other places that want to take a step up. But there's a lot to be said, as most of you know. The continuity along the offensive line is massive, and Notre Dame has been able to maintain that. They don't have to spend roster spots / cash on offensive linemen. They can look in other places. And now with the turn to Carr and Mitchie at quarterback, they're probably not going to have to spend a lot of money on quarterback either here in the near future. So that's a plus for Notre Dame. And I don't think I gave the real reason why I took Notre Dame ahead of Texas A&M, despite the 99 starting assignments disparity. And the reason is because Notre Dame was more productive last year. I mean, their numbers across the board were more productive. A&M was number 2 in the SEC in rushing. And you have to factor that in as well when you're playing 9 times. Is it 9 times their schedule? 8 or 9 times when they're playing SEC opponents. That's pretty tough competition. That's physical competition. So it's real close. Notre Dame, Texas A&M. They both have great offensive lines going into this season. So our tally, and again, the numerical process that we use is very inexact. It's not an exact science, but right now we have Notre Dame with a slight lead over Miami and a very slight lead over Texas A&M, and that's not a surprise. These are the three of the 13 teams that we're talking about. These are clearly the three best teams overall. We'll get into the defense starting maybe this weekend, early next week. And then number four in the listing of four offensive positions. USC is fourth. And then there's a fairly significant drop off to fifth, sixth, and seventh. Fifth is Arkansas. Again, these are close in the tally. Arkansas, and then you factor in at Arkansas. I think they're a worthy number five. Number six is Pittsburgh, and number seven offensively right now is Boise State because of where they are at quarterback and with their offensive line. So just checking in, we'll do another ISO once we get done with the defense, or maybe after we complete the entire process when we add the coaching and the schedule into it. The schedule will play a part. I've had people say, "Well, you purport this to be a talent evaluation, and then you throw in schedule, which has nothing to do with it." I get that, but schedule has and timing of schedule has such a big influence on the outcome of the season that you have to take all those things in consideration. So this inexact science that is called first rate, we're in the middle of the 15th year of doing this, and I think it's pretty telling. It gives me a good base to work off of when we go into the season. I start working on previews and start looking at film of opponents and see how they match up to what I thought they were in the preseason. And so far, Notre Dame is matching up quite well there at the top of the pack. Until next time, Tim Priester, this has been Irish Illustrated ISO.